Good day and welcome to Predators Proclivity, where we look at the data from the season for the NHL Nashville Predators and make comments upon it. I'm your host, Preston Proctor. Okay, good day. All right, the Preds play tonight. They play Winnipeg. Before we got to that, I thought there were some big games, big playoff implications. We're getting to the end of the year, so there are, kind of interestingly enough, a few games that have no playoff implications. A couple Arizona playing San Jose, that kind of stuff. But in general, a lot of the games do. So what happened over the weekend? I'm going to run through all of the divisions because at some point in time, we're going to have to play the Eastern Conference. And the Eastern Conference is kind of exciting right now that so many teams are still in the hunt and positions are not quite set. I think I think Boston and New York are going to be the top of their division, so that's not going to change. But a lot of teams are still in play. Interestingly enough, the Atlantic Division has their three divisional spots, plus right now hold both wild cards. So the Metropolitan third spot is a big deal, and one of those teams trying to get into one of the wild card spots. Tampa Bay has locked up a wild card spot. They're unlikely to overtake Toronto, so I think it's going to be Florida at the top, and then or Boston at the top, and then you've got Florida and Toronto trying to get the second and third spot, and then Tampa Bay is far enough away they're not going to compete for the divisional spots, so they're going to have one of the wild card spots, and then the Islanders, the Penguins, Caps, Flyers all still have reasonable chances of getting into the one of the wild card spots. But Detroit currently holds that, and they're in the Atlantic. So New Jersey hasn't been eliminated in the East Coast yet. Interestingly enough, only 3 teams have been eliminated in the Eastern Conference: Columbus, Montreal, and Ottawa. So it's pretty exciting what's going on over in that conference. Those of you that have listened know that we are Jonathan Quick fans, the awesome goaltender who won 2 Stanley Cups in L.A. and then won last year with Anaheim. And if the Preds don't make the play or Preds don't win the Stanley Cup, we're pulling for Jonathan Quick to get his name on the Stanley Cup for the 4th time. We have been to Toronto and been to the NHL, whatever you call it, where they keep their awards. A little under the weather today. That's what I'm going to blame my problems on, even though I have them every day. But today it's because I'm not feeling so well. But we've been there. We've seen the cup. We have seen Jonathan Quick's name on it. So we think that's great. Well, the Kings being on there was very exciting for us. I've seen the cup. I worked at the NHL All-Star Game as a volunteer one year when it came to LA, and that was so much fun. I'm a software consultant by trade. I wasn't working for anybody at the time, so I had my entire day to go and be a volunteer at the NHL All-Star Game and all of the things that go on around it. And it was very slow at times, and so I was able to get around and do a lot of stuff. So it was a lot of fun. Thus, ergo, I'm going to, instead of saying so all the time, I like thus, ergo, not as much fun. So just kind of is such the nice interlude. But anyway, so the play, my history with the NHL. That's what this show is about. Hello. Yes, this weekend's playoff games. Boston held serve against Florida. Toronto and Detroit got victories. So the first, third, and fifth teams in the Atlantic Division won, and the second, fourth, and sixth teams in the division lost. Very interesting. Metropolitan, the Rangers, Hurricanes, Islanders, and Pens all won, 1 through 4 in the division, and 5th and 6th in the division, the Caps and the Devils both lost, with the number 7, the Caps and the Flyers. The Caps and the Flyers lost, with the number 7 Devils getting a win and a loss. Okay, so Metropolitan Division, the people at the top were winning. And the people at the bottom were losing. But fortunately for the Devils, they got to play twice. Another interesting fact when I was looking into this, the Central Division, 5 of the 6 top teams played both on Saturday and Sunday in the Central Division. No other division had that. So it was a critical weekend or a pivotal weekend for the Central Division. Of the other divisions, only the Devils played twice of those that are still trying to vie for a spot. Jets were the only team to win on Saturday in the Central Division. Colorado, of the 6 teams I'm tracking, Colorado didn't play but managed to lose to Dallas on Sunday. Dallas, Nashville, St. Louis, and Minnesota all lost. The Wild played the Jets, so somebody had to lose, and that was Saturday. So Saturday was not a very good team for the Central Division, not a very good day for the Central Division. Sunday, switch it around, all wins except for Colorado, who played Dallas. As I said, only one of them could win. Nashville, St. Louis, and Minnesota all got wins. Thus, Dallas, Winnipeg, Nashville, St. Louis, and Minnesota all came out 1-1 this weekend. Colorado 0-1, Winnipeg 1-0. In the Pacific, Vancouver lost to the Kings. That's a big issue because they're fighting it out for the 3rd divisional spot in the Pacific, and then whoever doesn't get that will be competing with Nashville for a wild card spot. Things on the Western Conference are not as pat at the top as in the Eastern. Dallas is looking pretty good, 5 points ahead of the Avalanche with 4 to go. So, Dallas is probably going to win that division. Winnipeg, who went on that crazy losing streak at a critical time of the season, have a game in hand on Colorado, and they're only 2 points behind. They were playing tonight. They've got a lot to play for. They could move from the 3rd to the 2nd spot in the division. And remembering how the playoffs go, the 2nd and 3rd teams in the division play each other, with the 2nd place team getting home ice advantage. So if you want home ice advantage, you would prefer to be in the 2nd versus 3rd playoff spot. So they've got a chance at that. Hopefully not a good one tonight. There is significant differential between Winnipeg and Nashville. Nashville is not going to be able to make it into the 3rd spot. They're 6 points behind with 4 games remaining. It could. They're playing Winnipeg tonight, which helps. They win in regulation. It becomes a 4-point differential with 3 games to go. So, I still think, it's going to be a tough slog. Winnipeg is going to have to help the Preds if the Preds are making it to the 3rd divisional spot. Dallas is going to be on top. Colorado, Winnipeg fighting it out for 2 and 3. Nashville could. Then, they'd be playing Colorado, but I'll cover that later. St. Louis is significantly behind, 7 points behind the Preds, with 4 games to go. So they're not going to be able to overtake the Preds. In the Pacific, interesting, Vancouver is on top at 104, but Edmonton is only 5 points behind, and they have 2 games in hand. So I kind of wrote Vancouver into that number 1 spot before, maybe not. Maybe not. Edmonton still has a chance. The Kings do not have a chance at overtaking Edmonton. They're 6 points behind with 5 games remaining. Again, they could, but Edmonton would have to help the Kings, and they would have needed to have started over the weekend by losing to Calgary, and that didn't happen. So that's kind of what that is looking like. Over the weekend, the Pacific Division, Vancouver lost to the Kings and Edmonton defeated Calgary. Last night, Vancouver and Vegas played, and Vancouver beat Vegas. So Vancouver is trying to stay on top. They could have helped Edmonton overtake them had they lost, but they did lose to the Kings on Saturday, but they beat Vegas last night. And then last night, Vancouver beat Vegas. Toronto beat Pittsburgh in overtime, keeping them in reach for Florida for the second in the Atlantic. And Pittsburgh's 1 point got them in a tie with Detroit for the second wild card spot. Detroit does break that tie, having one less game played. And as I said, that puts 5 teams from the Atlantic Division in the playoffs. Okay, so Vegas losing keeps them 1 point behind LA for the third spot in the Pacific. Both teams have 5 games remaining. So that's still a toss-up. Ergo, it's still a toss-up. And it still leaves them in the second wildcard spot behind Nashville. But Nashville, has to hold serve. 4 games remaining. Last 4 games start tonight. Tonight. Wow. What a segue. Good job. Hey, thanks. I appreciate that. Tonight's game is at home, and the opponents are the Winnipeg Jets, who are 47, 24, and 6. On the road, they're 22, 13, and 3. As I've said, the Jets are in the third place in the Central Division with 100 points. They have 5 games left, 2 points behind second place Colorado and first place Dallas by 7, and they have a game in hand on each. I think Dallas is out of reach, but as I said, Colorado may not be. They are ahead of fourth place Nashville by 6, who has 4 games left. So looking like the number 2 or 3 division seed. Cover the playoffs a little bit later, but the matchups later. First playoff is first wild card spot is what the Preds are looking at. The Winnipeg Jets, although they're in pretty good position right now, but I guess they were in better position a while back because they are 4-6 in their last 10 games. They have won 3 games in a row. Before that, they had lost 6 in a row. Pretty good. This point of the season, you lose 6 games in a row and you're still in a divisional spot. Wow. So they definitely played better previously. Tonight's game is the second game of a 4-game road trip for the Jets. Dallas and Colorado are next. So no slouch of a schedule for them. Then they play 2 at home to end the season, Seattle and Vancouver. So of their last 5 games, tonight included, 4 of those teams are in playoff positions, and 2 of them are ahead of them in the division. So those games could have pretty major divisional standing implications. There you go. The Jets did make 2 trades at the trading deadline, both with New Jersey. They received defenseman Colin Miller for a 4th-round pick in 2026. And for a 3rd-rounder in 2024 and a 2nd-rounder in 2025, they received forward Tyler Toffoli. We played Winnipeg earlier in the season, just after the trade deadline. Tyler was not much of a factor in that game, which surprised me because he's such a good player. So I hope he has an off game again tonight. I hate to say it because he is such a good player. He was a king. He was in the 2014 Stanley Cup team and part of the 70s line with Jeff Carter and Preston Pearson. No, I'm Preston Pearson. No, I'm Preston Proctor. So, okay. Anyway, yes, so they traded they have Tyler Toffoli. Okay, so the Preds are 45, 29, and 4 overall. At home, 22, 16, and 1. So not the best home team, but a winning record. In the last 10 games, the Preds are 6-4, alternating wins and losses for the last 4 games, the last game being the win Sunday in New Jersey. Since February 16th, 18-4-2. 18-4-2 since the U2 concert decision. Otherwise, they wouldn't be anywhere near a playoff spot. 18-4-2, that's impressive. I know they were on an 18-game point streak. They lost 3 in a row. But still, since, in this last run, they're playing well. Winnipeg is the only game in this homestand. They are currently alternating home and away games for the last 4 games of the season. Winnipeg tonight, Chicago, Columbus, and Pittsburgh coming up. Winnipeg is the only team left on the schedule currently in a playoff position, but Pittsburgh is making a run at that spot. Had they won against Toronto, they would at least temporarily have been in the second wild card spot in the East. Detroit has played less games, but they would be 1 point ahead. So, if you've got the point, rather have the points than the games in hand because you could always lose. The Preds are 4th in the Central Division with 94 points, 6 points behind Winnipeg. Preds 4 games left, Winnipeg 5. Dallas does lead the division with 107 points, followed by Colorado at 102, 2 points out of Winnipeg. And Winnipeg has played 1 less game than the rest. The Preds are in the number 1 wildcard spot, 2 points ahead of Vegas. Vegas has 5 games remaining, so they have 1 game in hand. LA is 1 point behind the Preds and also with a game in hand, so Vegas and LA are even with games remaining. The Preds are 7 points ahead of the Blues, and St. Louis has 4 games left, which puts them 5 points behind Vegas with a game in hand. So it's looking, like the St. Louis is going to be the last team not to make the playoffs. So if the playoffs did start today, the Preds would be matched up with Vancouver because they being in the first wild card spot. They would be playing the divisional winner with the fewest points, which would be Vancouver. The Canucks are 5 points behind Dallas with 4 games left. As I said, Edmonton still has a chance of overtaking Vancouver. So that is, I didn't think so. I thought Vancouver had it wrapped up. But got to play the games, and here they are. Okay. In the Central, Dallas, Colorado, and Winnipeg have secured a playoff spot, and in the Pacific, Vancouver and Edmonton have. So you have the Kings, the Preds, the Golden Knights sewn up a spot yet? Technically, no, because the Blues and even the Wild are still within reach. But, Arizona, Anaheim, Calgary, Chicago, San Jose, and Seattle have been eliminated from playoff consideration. Minnesota 9 points back with 5 games left. St. Louis 5 points out with 4 games left. So not terribly likely for those two teams. But you got to play the games, right? If the Preds were in a tie with either LA or Vegas, Nashville does hold the edge with a higher regulation win total, RW, over both LA and Vegas. They have 36, LA has 35, and Vegas 32. And also has the advantage on regulation and overtime wins, the second tie-breaking consideration. Preds have 42 points, LA 39, and Vegas 38. Winnipeg has the regulation win advantage over the Preds and the regulation overtime wins advantage over the Preds. Regulation wins 42-36 and overtime wins 47-42. This season, looking at who the Preds may wind up playing in the first round, this season on Dallas, the Preds are 2-2. In the situation there, the road team won all of the games, which is a good marker because the Preds are not going to have home ice advantage. Whoever they play is going to have home ice advantage. So the fact that they won on the road in Dallas is good. If Colorado somehow overtook Dallas, the Preds are 2-1 against Colorado. The home team has won all of those games. Not as good of a metric. Again, playoff games are different. If you haven't been to a playoff hockey game, you should go. So much fun, so much excitement and energy in the stadium in a playoff game. Sure, it's the same for other sports too. It's better than, or it's more than the regular season. Watching a hockey game in person is so much better than watching it on TV. And I don't think that that's really true in a lot of sports. What happens on the field is fairly contained. You have to have a break and a stoppage to replace players. In hockey, people just jump on the ice, or in the case of San Jose, play the puck from the bench. But there's it's a lot more dynamic because you don't necessarily see the changes, see people coming in and off the bench. You get a sense of what's going on. It's also handy that there's only 6 players, 5 of them generally the only ones moving. So it's a pretty dynamic game. If they were to play Vancouver, they're 0-3 against Vancouver. Two games at home against Vancouver and 1 away. The one caveat I would say there is that all of those games were in 2023. So they were in the first 32 games of the season. The Preds arguably did not play well at the beginning of the season. So, can we really look at that and use that moving forward? I'm not so sure, but that is what it is. Edmonton, 1-2 against Edmonton, lost in home and 1-1 in Edmonton. The other thing about that, the travel, granted there's plenty of time between the games, but the travel from Nashville to Dallas or Colorado would be a lot easier than getting to Vancouver or Edmonton. But you play who you play. But that's just kind of what we're looking at. Just looking at these numbers, it looks more advantageous to meet Dallas than the other teams because we have 1-2 in Dallas and split with Dallas. So There you go. Tonight is not a playoff game, but it may as well be, because we are playing a playoff game and we only have 4 games left. So tonight against Winnipeg, it is the 4th and final game with them this year and the second home game against Winnipeg for the Preds. The Preds split both games in Winnipeg and 1 in Nashville. So we're currently 2-1 against Winnipeg. Back in November, they played twice. So that was, again, early in the season. The home team won each of those games. And then in March, Nashville won in Winnipeg. So that was a more recent game. Again, November, the first game was 6-3. The second game was 3-2. And then in March, 4-2. So the loss was 6-3. The win was 3-2. And then 4-2 win here in March. When they lost in November, it was the second of a 4-game losing streak, whereas the November win was the 5th game of a 6-game winning streak. And the March win was the first game of a 6-game winning streak. So, like that. The win in November for the Jets was the third of a 3-game winning streak, whereas the loss ended a 5-game winning streak and started a 3-game losing streak. The loss in March was the last loss in a string of alternating wins and losses. They went on to win the next 3, lose the next 6 after that, and then won the next 3, which leads us to tonight. Seemed to be a very streaky team. I'm not sure if that's good or bad coming into the playoffs, but they seem to be a streaky team. In the loss, the Preds did not get the first goal, but they did in the wins. All the first goals were in the first period. In the loss, they tied the first, lost the second and third. In the November win, they won the first and second and lost the third. So in the first one, they lost. They didn't get the first goal. They tied 1 and lost 2. If you lose 2 or win 2, if you win 2, you're going to win the game. If you lose 2, you're going to lose the game. Like I said, it's only happened. Losing 2 periods has only happened once where they did win, losing 2 periods, but they also won 2 periods because it went to overtime. So in November, they won 2, lost 1. Again, pretty strong to win the game. And in March, they won the first and tied the second and third. Winnipeg does enter the game on a 3-game winning streak. The Preds won their last game and are 2-4 over the last 6 games. So what are the Preds like at home? Excuse me. What are the Preds like at home? The Preds are 22-16-1 at home. Their last home game was last Thursday, a 6-3 victory over St. Louis. They tied the first period, getting the first goal. They won the second and third periods. So at home, when they tie the first period, they're 10-5, 10-5-0. When they win the second period, they're 9-2-0. When they win the third, they're 16-1-0. Winning the third, 16-1-0. I got to look into that one. Getting the first goal at home, they are 16-5-1. So, that's a 3-1 advantage. They're 6-11-0 when they don't, roughly, 2-1 for the opponents. A strong determiner. I used to poo-poo that. It's one of those things where, okay, it does seem to be a strong indicator. I still don't buy getting the first goal being the most important thing, but I guess it is the best thing that you can do. Well, the best thing you can do is score a lot of goals. And what you really want to do is score more goals than the other team. In the end, that's what you're really trying to do. But there you go. If they tie one period, they're 12-10. So tying one period doesn't throw the coin. Makes it a coin flip, right? Winning two periods, 13-0. So one of those 13 wins, they actually lost two periods, but they won two periods. So getting the first goal, 3-1 advantage. The Preds got the first goal against St. Louis, and in both games against Winnipeg, they did not get the first goal in the loss to Winnipeg. Their record by period, looking at how they play in the first, second, third, overtime and shootout, it's just wins, just whether they score more than the other team or not, or tie. And overall, at home, they're 15-9-15 in the first period. So they have a winning record, a lot of ties. In the second period, they're 11-14-14. So they have a losing record in the second. The third period, 17-11-11. Ergo, 5-1 in overtime. Ergo, they again, the second period at home generally gets close to being 500, 11-14-14, right? When they get the first goal, let's take a look at that first. When they get the first goal, that 15-9-15 record in the first becomes 14-0-8. So if they get the first goal, they've not lost the first period at home. They've tied it, but they haven't lost it. If they don't get it, if they don't get the first goal, they're 1-9-7. So, not getting the first goal, their numbers on the periods is terrible. It really. 2-10-5 in the second. Okay, 6-3-8 in the third. That's a winning record. 2-0 in overtime. So like that, really, given that they're 15-9-15 in the first period overall, the 1-9-7, if they don't get the first goal, wow, 2-10. And the first goal generally happens in the first period. At home, it has happened in the third as well, but that's it. Just carries through the whole game. Is the amazing thing. When they do get the first goal in the second period, they're 9-4-9. So it's still a winning record. 11-8-3 in the third. When they get the first goal, they have a winning record in all the periods, which they don't overall at home. That is so. Big determining factor there. When they lose the game, they have a losing record in all periods. I guess that kind of makes sense. But you would maybe not think that, because you don't think that if you lose the game, you're going to lose all the periods. The winning goal, let's take a look at the winning goal by percentages. And overall, it's evenly spread between the second and third period. This is overall, not just home, this is home and away. 36 and 35 at home, very similar. 31 in the second and 36 in the third. When the Preds win, the high percentage is in the second period at 36%. Which is in line with the overall percentage. When the Preds lose, 47% of the time, it's in the third period. So you can basically say half the time they lose, they lose it in the third period. I guess it leads for an exciting game anyway, right? A quarter of the time in the first and second. So that actually is the number in the first period for when the Preds lose and the goal gets scored in the first period is higher in the first and third period than it is in any of the other situations, overall at home, or when the Preds win. So, the first, it's 24%, same as the second, but much higher for the opponents to score it than for the Preds, or, averaging it out. That's kind of interesting there. So. Scoring by period at home, the Preds have been outscored by their opponents in the first period by 6. They are even in the second and have a 10-goal advantage in the third. Really doesn't seem to jive because they've got a winning record in the first period, but they're getting outscored. So that's really kind of mind-numbing there. But they are even, 6 goals. I guess it's not a lot, but still. They are even in the second, have a 10-goal advantage in the third, and they have 4 goals ahead in overtime. Since February 16th, the Preds have a goals against average and goals out. They have outscored the opponents. There we go. That's what I'm trying to say. By 1, 6, and 14. 14 in the third, 10 overall, but 14 since February 16th. 6 in the second, whereas they were even, and they switched from being 6 goals down to being 1 goal ahead since the 16th. Not real surprising. They've been playing well since then. But that's kind of what we're tracking. Critical decision in the Preds season right there. Percentages of outscoring. The Preds are roughly as likely to outscore the opponents by 1 as they are to tie them in the period, 31 to 37%. And yet they are behind in number of goals scored. But, 68% of the time, 2/3, they're either going to tie or outscore by 1. Outscoring by 2 by the either team is the same as 8. And 25% of the time, the opponents outscore the Preds. 3, 8, 8, and 5 for 1, 2, 3, and 4. So 3% by 1, 8% by 2, 8% by 3, and 5% by 4. So more over the season, have they been outscored by 2, 3, or 4 than by 1? Ergo, they've been outscored in the first period. Because I don't think the Preds had anything above 2. That's fine. Win the period. I win the period, outscore by 1. In the second period, about a third of the time, again, they tie 36% of the time. And a quarter, 26, they either outscore by 1 or 2, or I guess 28%, by 13% in the first or 15 in the second. Similarly, 28%, the opponents outscore by 1. So similar percentages on being outscored by 1 as to outscore the opponents by 1 or 2. The Preds have been outscored by 2 in 8% of the games. But a tie, 36%. The third period, interesting, a tie drops to close to a quarter, down from over a third to a quarter. So this is the period that is least likely to wind up in a tie, 28% of the time. Another third that they outscore the opponents either by 1 or 2, 18% for 1 and 15 for 2. The Preds outscore the opponents outscore the Preds by 1, 2, or 3 goals about a third of the time, 10, 8, and 10. So the Preds could outscore the opponents a third of the time by 1 or 2. The opponents would the same percentage by 1, 2, or 3. And in the latest thing I'm looking at, I think last broadcast, I think I started to get confused when I was talking about this because I haven't really internalized what these numbers mean. But when the Preds lose the third period, there was one stat that I was looking at the other day, and I'm like, okay, they lost the third period. Well, how did they get there, right? So when at home, when the Preds lose the third period, they were 6-2-3 coming into that period. Now, granted, 11 games is not a huge data set. It's close. I mean, we're getting close to some real numbers there. But they're 6-2-3 coming into the period. So only losing twice, but they come out of it with a 3-8 record. So of the 6 times they were leading, they wind up being 3-3, and then they lose. If they're losing and they lose the third period, they're going to lose the game. I mean, there's nothing there. If they're tied and they lose the period, they're going to lose the game. So that's no surprise there. But 6 times they come into the third period, they lose the third period, and half the time they lost the game. Kind of an interesting statistic. With a third period tie, looking at the difference between home and on the road, a third period tie overall, they're 8-7-8 coming into it. Okay, which is fairly even, right? But at home, if they tie the third period, coming into that period, they're 1-7-3 versus 7-0-5 on the road. Very, very different. Interesting. The tie the third period, if they tie the third period and they're losing, they lose the game, right? Makes sense. If they tie the third period and they're tied, goes to overtime. Okay, got it. Winning, and they tie the third period, but 1-7-3 at home and 7-0-5 on the road. So they've never been, I guess on the road, they've never been losing the third period when they tie it. Okay, well, that's cool. You're not losing. You're either winning or tied, and you tie the third period. I guess better than losing the period. So, okay, so anyway, let's leave those numbers behind. The other notable situation is second period loss. When they lose the second period, how did they get there? Okay, so overall, again, 12-11-7. At home, 4-8-2. 4-8-2 when they lose the second period. They lose the second period, and so that's a data set of 14 games, 8 of which they lost the first period anyway. So the combinatorics of losing the first, losing the second, well, that's not good. Then you've lost 2 periods, right? Away, it's 8-3-5. Big difference. On the road, 8-3-5. So they won the first period 8 times, lost at 3 and tied at 5, and then they lose the second period. 8-3-5 at home, 4-8-2. So again, one of the reasons why I started this podcast was because I thought at home they played poorly in the second period. I didn't think they played necessarily so poorly on the road. And then the end result is not very good. That 12-11-7 entry into the second period loss becomes 7-21-2. 7-21-2. So they win 7 games. So they overall entered the second period with winning in 12 games. They lose the second period. They only win 7 of those games. So 21, they lose 2 to go to overtime. At home, 2-11-1. Well, I mean, what do you expect? They were 4-8-2 coming into the period, so they not very good. And then they lose the second period, and then away it's 5-10-1. So the 8-3-5 record, they come in 8 and lose the second period. They still win 5. I guess it's better than not. So just, again, looking at the numbers. So, when we see different things and look at how you wonder, okay, they lost the third period, and this is that's bad, and they've got a bad record when that happens. And so you try to think, okay, how did they get there? So if they lose the third period when they're when they're losing every period moving up to that, well, okay, so they lost the third period and they were losing most of the games getting there. Okay. Was there a reversal of fortune for the other team? Was were the Preds coming in? They were winning a lot, and then they lose the third period by such a margin that they lose the game, right? Just trying to understand some of these things that happen. 6-2-3 coming into the third period, and you lose the third period, so you're looking at the six. So they were winning 6 times. They lost the third period. They're 3-3, 500. What was it was the goal differential there. Anyway, that's more numbers to parse. My spreadsheet's looking pretty gnarly these days. But that's the sort of thing that gets me kind of interested. Let's try to put these numbers together. Based upon I've got part of my spreadsheet that says, okay, here's the goal differential for the different periods, and how does that map to the goal differential in following periods? So, tracking the differential, I guess the Dallas game skewed things, but goal differential of 7 for the opponents, and I think 6 for the Preds. And, how does that track, and what are percentages for that? And then how does that follow on? So I haven't gotten any of those numbers because I'm not sure how to make that make sense. And I haven't really seen anything when I look at those numbers that really kind of say, hey, you need to call this out. Interesting trends, right, is kind of the things that I'm looking at. And the differential between how they play at home versus on the road, and how they get to places based on how they play on the road versus at home, right? They appear to be a little bit better of a road team than a home team. They're 23-13-3 away, 22-16-1. It gets kind of close, but I've always felt like they were a better road team. Especially the second period, which is one of the things you have to look at, hopeful for, because they're going to be playing a lot of games on the road in the playoffs. They have no chance of having the home ice unless somehow or another the finals wind up being the 2 wild card seeds. In which case, Nashville being in the number 1 wild card spot, they would play the second wild card team. They're not going to have the hardest road to go, being in the first wild card spot. Not like the Kings back in 2012 when they were the second wild card team, and they had to beat the number 1, number 2, and number 3 teams in the conference in order to make the Stanley Cup and win it, because of the way the NHL reorders. I think they were one of the first leagues to do that. I think I don't think the NFL does that, but I'm not sure baseball does. I think basketball does. But basically, you fill out your chart 1 to 8, and if 8 beats 1, they don't get to play. The winner 4-5, they get to play the highest seed. So the highest seed, having a higher seed, you play the weakest team or the lowest seed team corresponding to where you're at. So if you're the number 1 seed, you will always play in each round the lowest seed that is in that round. So if 1, 2, 3, 4 win, then you play the 4 seed. But if the number 7 team beats the number 2 team, then as the 1 seed, if you win the first round, you get to play the number 7. So being the first seed in your conference gives you that advantage in the playoffs. I think that's fair. kind of, not really. They want to advantage the teams that had the better regular season record. Fine. It's one way to do it. Makes it exciting. Makes it a little bit less, harder to figure out who you're playing in the next round. But that's how the NHL does it. So we're not changing that today. This is not the podcast on coming up with the new playoff system for the NHL. This is Predators Proclivity, where we talk about the data for the NHL Nashville Predators and comment on it, as I say at the beginning of the show. And with that, thanks for listening. I'm Preston Proctor, and you've been listening to Predators Proclivity.